prescription. Have you ever been with the essential oils and lotions and food relief?
My tinge unit.
Yeah,
I love it.
mine's in the car for the ride home.
I love my tinge unit. I sleep with it all night long, literally. I have it taped to my knees right now.
I did that the other day, and now they feel like they're blue because I've had it on for a while. I think I just did. So, there you go.
Well, I usually get up about 11:30, 12 o'clock and put mine on my knees. And then,
Slept with it now tonight.
Well, you know, Ashley, I have one of those from years ago, and I have it like put up. So maybe I should
I love it.
get it out and.
and if you get on that Facebook page,
Yeah.
I'll send you
Welcome, everybody.
$1.29.
A little clap for my AV equipment here to keep my AV thing. How many people here have pain and often feel alone or even feel that people don't believe you have your pain?
So,
A lot of people, yes. How many of you are still looking for a doctor to help you?
oh, I just got my
Kinda, sorta.
Thank you.
Sharon, we have 4 people in our group.
Sure, absolutely. Thank you. How's this?
Okay. I have 4 ladies.
This one on? How about now?
Yeah.
How about now? No? Testing?
That was better.
Hello? Probably. All right, we're gonna let that go.
Thank you.
Okay, so I'll stick with this one for now. All right, so welcome to our 17th annual Michigan Fibromyalgia Awareness Day. This year's theme is taking charge of fibromyalgia. What does this mean? Last year's speaker, Dr. Ginevra Lepton, said, dig deep for the inner strength, the strength you may not even know you have to fight this illness. Finding this strength combined with becoming educated will give you the ability to take control. My name is Sharon Waldrop, and I'm the president and founder of the Fibromyalgia Association of Michigan. I have been traveling this road of chronic pain since my teens, when terrible periods became diagnosed as endometriosis. At 24, I was diagnosed with fibromyalgia, and pretty shortly thereafter, I was bedridden. I really thought my life was over. I thought that I wouldn't accomplish many things, like things that I wanted to do, including getting married, having kids and a career, and many things. The diagnosis and the experience of it was quite life-altering. But just 1 year ago, I climbed trees with my son. We went zip lining at a wonderful adventure park here in Bloomfield Township. And while I have to say I paid for it the next few days, it was a lot of fun. And there was no way that I could have done that years ago. I couldn't even do stairs. I have a stair lift in my home. When I was first diagnosed, I couldn't do stairs for many, many years. Then miraculously, after my children were born, I was able to do stairs again. So kind of a curious thing there. While fibromyalgia and chronic pain illnesses are challenging and even devastating, I believe that much can be done to live better with the illnesses, and my story is proof of that. I do believe healing is possible, but healing can't happen without education. And we know that there's so much to learn about fibromyalgia and chronic pain. And there's a lot of information out there. You know, not all of it's equal. But there's a lot of great information out there. And sadly, fibromyalgia is not an illness that you can just take a pill and you're all better. So for those of you who are maybe newer and you're seeing those Lyrica commercials where you pop the pill and then boom, you're good to go. I hate to be the one to kind of crash that excitement, but that's typically not how that works. Lyrica can be very effective for some people. However, people that I know who are dealing effectively with fibromyalgia are doing a variety of treatments and lifestyle management in order to live with the condition. It goes well beyond just taking a prescription. So there's a lot of trial and error, so it really does take a lot of patience. That's why I started the Fibromyalgia Support and Education Group 20 years ago, just 1 year after being diagnosed. Most of our volunteers have fibromyalgia, or they are our supporters, which is the name we give to our loved ones who help, and we can always call upon to come out at times like this and give us an extra hand. So if everybody could give me a round of applause for all of our awesome volunteers we have. Without them, we couldn't do this. So another exciting thing that I'm thrilled, for those of you who've been to last year's Awareness Day, you've heard us talking about a new website. So I'm thrilled that up behind me is our new website. So it's been a long time in the making. We're having some AV issues, so I can't really scroll around too much on there, I don't think. It's pretty slow to load. Oh, we got a few things loading. Yeah, the text you won't be able to read from here. I'm just kind of giving you a sample. But we have information on here about our support and education group, our advocacy programs, of course, Awareness Day, testimonials, and ways to stay connected with us. Ways, of course, to donate and help us continue our work, to join us in membership, what's happening in the news with fibromyalgia, and so much more. So I do hope that you'll join us on our new online home for our online family at famichigan.org. So it is on all of your materials, and I know that there are people here who don't have materials and wish that they did. I just wanted to mention that we are a nonprofit organization, and we try to make our resources go very far. So what we do is we plan resources for all the early bird registrants, and we try to have so many extra beyond that, but it's so hard to judge from year to year how many extras we need. So, anyways.
I've got one that we can give away.
Oh, okay.
So do I. So do I.
Oh, awesome. Okay. So, and please, folks are willing to share, so thank you. When you do leave, if you don't have a packet, check with us, because there are people who didn't show up, and we can't mail the packets out or anything, so we will give them away. So do check with us. Also, if you don't get a packet, we will be doing a follow-up email after the conference, and the two most important documents that you can't get online will be emailed to you, so you will get the information. So be sure, though, that you do give us your email address. Also, I want to make sure that you're familiar with another great organization, the NFMCPA, the National Fibromyalgia and Chronic Pain Association. I'm vice president of that organization, and we do many of the same things that our association here in Michigan does, but on a national level. We really focus our work on advocacy, working in DC, FDA, other places, to make sure that the voice of the chronic pain patient is heard. You can check that out. The NFMCPA also has a really great website that we'll have a link to on ours that has a lot of resources for fibromyalgia. So I would highly recommend that as well. And their website is fibroinpain.org, but again, I will email you that information. So we do need help with advocacy, as the Lorax said, and Dr. Seuss. Unless someone like you cares a whole awful lot, nothing is going to get better. So it's important, even though we don't feel well, if we don't stand up for ourselves, there's nobody else doing it. So that's how I got involved, and I need more people standing by my side, and by that, that could mean something as small as, hey, would you forward this email on to your legislator? Hey, would you sign this petition? Or could you write me like your story? It doesn't have to be beautiful, doesn't have to be spelled correctly, it can be bullet pointed. The legislators want to hear from me that there's multiple people with similar problems. They don't want to just take my word for it. And perfect timing, because one of our champion legislators just walked in the room, so I'll have you come on down. Senator Stephen Vita is here. He's going to talk for just a couple of minutes. He has been a champion for us for 17 years now, so we're sad to see his time up in the state senate, but hope we'll have his help in new positions along the way. So I'll let you take it over.
Thank you, everybody. My name is Steve Vita. I'm currently state senator for this area, and previous to that, I was in the State House of Representatives, and I've had some family members that have been impacted by fibromyalgia, so I have a personal experience with that, and kind of as a result of it, I became involved quite a few years ago with this group, and I lost count of how many of the tributes, resolutions that I have brought on behalf of the state of Michigan and my colleagues, but I'm proud to do so again today. And I currently represent the southern part of Macomb County. If you live in Macomb County, I'm actually running for a countywide office, so if you can remember my name, I appreciate that. I'm not here to campaign, although maybe just a little bit. But I did want to present this to you, and I'm going to read, I'll just read it off. Let me know that it is with great pleasure to recognize May 12, 2018 as Fibromyalgia Day in the state of Michigan. This will commemorate the 18th anniversary of spreading awareness and education for fibromyalgia. Fibromyalgia is a complex chronic pain disorder that affects an estimated 10 million Americans and approximately 3 to 6% of the population worldwide. While it occurs most often in women, it strikes men and children in all ethnic backgrounds. Family members of fibromyalgia patients are 8 times more likely to also experience the illness. This condition affects the central nervous system. For those with severe symptoms, fibromyalgia can be extremely debilitating and interfere with basic daily activities. It often occurs following a physical trauma, such as acute illness or injury, which may act as a trigger in the development of the disorder. Recent studies have suggested that afflicted patients have generalized disturbance in pain processing and amplified response to stimuli would not ordinarily be painful to healthy individuals. Often, individuals have a number of coexisting conditions that may include chronic myofascial pain, IBS, TMJ, migraine, environmental sensitivities, anxiety, and depression. There is no known cure for fibromyalgia. Both the Fibromyalgia Association of Michigan, the National Fibromyalgia and Chronic Pain Association are not-for-profit 501c3 charitable organizations advocating for fibromyalgia awareness. I bet if you speak that really fast.
I know. We know.
Support and the better future of individuals through research, diagnosis, education, and treatment. So therefore, in special tribute, this document is signed and dedicated to commemorate the 18th annual Fibromyalgia Awareness Day in the state of Michigan. May all citizens help to educate and support family, friends, and neighbors who've been diagnosed with fibromyalgia as an expression of support and compassion to fight this dreadful pain disorder so that we would enable those who suffer from the disorder to live more peacefully. And it's signed by myself, Steve Vita, State Senator of the 9th District, also signed by State Senator Tori Rocca, State Representatives John Shurkin, Henry Yanez, Patrick Green, Kevin Hertel, and William Sowerby. And it's the 99th Legislature of Lansing on May 2018. So with this, I'm pleased to present this to you.
Paparazzi there
Yes,
to
we
take a
got
picture.
the
So.
I'm even shorter now. You
Yeah.
said that. Maybe I can go up one and. Thank you.
Okay,
And thank you,
before we do that, because I do like to educate. That's somebody else's phone that has
It is,
a
yep.
similar ringtone. I'd like you all to smile. We're gonna do this one. You're not smiling over there.
الميكروفون ضعيف الميكروفون ضعيف المايك.
Thank you so much, everybody. I hope you have a very eventful, fruitful conference, and my best wishes to everybody. It's been a pleasure to be doing this over this year. This is my
هذا
last year doing this
سيناتور من تبع
as a
الستيت
state
يكرم
legislator.
مركز
Hopefully in the future I'll be able to do this in some other capacity, but
الفايبروميلجيا.
I've always enjoyed your
ما
company,
أتكلم
your
بودون
kindness,
أتكلم.
and I stand with you. And I'm just glad to be here tonight. So thank you, everybody.
سيناتور من ميتشيجن يكرم مركز.
Okay. Well, that was perfect timing. We were talking about advocacy. Ears were ringing. So life hacks with fibromyalgia. You do have fibro fog. Many of us get that. So you just get yourself an external hard drive. You're all set. You're good to go. You remember what you're doing. Make lists. Whatever. My kids know, call everybody buddy, and then you don't have to worry about names. So these resolutions are really important every year because Senator Vita gets to chat with new members of the legislature and let them know about fibromyalgia and chronic pain. And then I have the opportunity to reach out to them as well. And so do all of you moving forward. You can educate your legislators, and that helps when there are bills and things being passed that affect the care that we're receiving. So, 3 important messages I want to make sure that you leave here with today. Your pain is real. You are not alone, and you can take charge of fibromyalgia, and we can help. So, try to remember at least those 3 things, and we hope you get a whole lot more out of today's program. To go over the program just a little bit, there is no break. Normally we have a break, but I know we get it. We all have fibromyalgia. Please do what you need to stay comfortable. So if you do need to, stand up and move around, you can walk up towards the back of the room. There are restrooms. We have a whole lot of food. We were worried about folks coming right from work, so feel free to have some food. There's also a raffle. We do the raffle to help us raise money for our programs in Fibromyalgia Awareness in Michigan. So if you didn't buy a raffle ticket and want one, we have some great prizes, including a salon, a massage, mani-pedis, all kinds of good stuff. So you can buy tickets during the conference. We do have someone out there. But be sure you're back so you don't miss anything. We will be doing a presentation to start with Dr. Claude, and we'll move into Q&A. And then it's after the Q&A at 10 minutes before 9 that we'll draw for our raffle winners. And I'm sorry, but you do need to be present to win. We can't control the temperature, so just to let folks know, we're not able to do anything on that. Please no live streaming of today's conference. And there are question cards in your, if you did get a packet. If you didn't get a packet and you want, it's an index card so that you can write your questions if you don't want to ask questions later. And we're going to do our best to answer as many of those. Obviously, we have a full house tonight, so we're going to do our best to take as many questions as we can, but you do have those index cards for that reason. So, without further ado, I'm going to get to the main reason we're here, which is Dr. Claude. He's been a wonderful supporter of ours all these years, and we really appreciate all that you do for us to help us better understand and live with fibromyalgia. So I'd like to bring him up here now. He is the director of the Chronic Pain and Fatigue Research Center at the University of Michigan. He's done a lot of work over the years, resulting in over 100 peer-reviewed publications, and he's received funding from the Department of Defense and other agencies to do his work. So I'll let him tell us more during his talk. Thank you very much for being here.
thank you for all of you do for advocacy. For those of you who aren't aware, this is really one of the leading advocacy groups in the country, the leading statewide advocacy groups, and Sharon does do a lot of work, as she alluded to, nationwide. So give Sharon. So some of you might know I grew up about 3 or 4 miles away from here in Warren at 13 Mile and Hayes. It's always nice to be asked to come back home to give a talk. I don't otherwise have any reason to come back to 13 Mile and Hayes. So every 3 or 4 years I come back and do this talk and try to give you a bit of an update on fibromyalgia. So I will do that today, and hopefully I'll give you some new information about fibromyalgia. Let me just say a couple things first, and that is I can entirely understand why you as patients are frustrated that some of your doctors or some of your healthcare providers don't know much about fibromyalgia and haven't been able to give you much advice that has made you much better. But I have a bit longer view of this, and that is how far we've come in fibromyalgia. When I started studying fibromyalgia 30 or so years ago, most people didn't know the word. Most doctors and most patients weren't even familiar with the term. And certainly most physicians thought that fibromyalgia patients were just neurotic middle-aged women that were making up their pain and other symptoms. And so we really have come a long way. We have a long way to go, but we've come a long way. And I'm going to talk a fair amount today about opioids, or at least allude to opioids. But one of the only good things that's happened because of the opioid epidemic that's occurring in the United States right now is that has brought increased awareness to chronic pain as a medical problem, and it is beginning to lead to more funding for pain research. Pain research historically has not been very well funded by the National Institutes of Health or other funding agencies, but because of a number of different efforts, including a report from the Institute of Medicine that came out about 5 or 6 years ago that said that chronic pain might be the most costly medical illness that we have in the United States when you look in aggregate at both direct and indirect medical costs. That report, as well as some of the things that have happened more recently with respect to opioids, have actually led to a lot more attention being placed on the pain field. And those of us that are doing pain research are hopeful that those dollars that are being appropriated and being spent on research will lead to fundamentally better understanding of conditions like fibromyalgia, as well as better treatments in the next 5, 10, 15 years. Let me just emphasize something that Sharon said, because I think this is really important for those of you in the audience. The University of Michigan mandates that anytime we give a talk anywhere, we show a disclosure slide. These are a number of pharmaceutical companies that I do consulting for. These are some of the only companies that are still trying to develop new drugs to treat chronic pain. But one of the things this slide always reminds me to say is that one of the big problems we have in the field of chronic pain is we simply don't have effective drugs to treat chronic pain like we have effective drugs to treat, for example, I'm trained as a rheumatologist. The drugs that we now have to treat autoimmune diseases like rheumatoid arthritis, lupus, scleroderma, are really game changers, and those drugs have only been developed in the last 10 to 15 years. Similarly, the new anti-cholesterol drugs, the new antihypertensive drugs, the new drugs to treat cancer have really revolutionized the treatment of a lot of those medical conditions, but there have really been no blockbuster drugs in the pain field forever, to be honest with you. A lot of the drugs that we're using to treat chronic pain are derivatives of drugs that have been around for centuries, whether they're opioids, non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs. I'll talk a fair amount about medical marijuana or cannabis as a treatment for pain as well today. But a lot of the drugs we use to treat pain are old drugs that are actually not very effective. And I really want to emphasize what Sharon said, is that if you want to get better and you have chronic pain, you're going to have to try a lot of things. And a lot of the kinds of things that we now are advocating you try are non-drug therapies that I never would have imagined when I was first trained as a physician 30 or so years ago would be things that I would be sitting up in front of a room advocating because they have strong scientific evidence. Things like acupuncture, mindfulness, meditation, Tai Chi, yoga. I'll talk about many of these types of non-drug therapies at the end of my talk, but I really wanted to sandwich them and talk about them at the beginning and the end of my talk to really have this be a point of emphasis, is that we don't know which of those non-drug therapies are best for you as an individual pain patient, but what we know is that each of those therapies can work well in subsets of people with chronic pain. And those therapies, by and large, are more effective than any of the drugs that we have to treat chronic pain. So if you as a patient go into your doctor and ask or demand that your fibromyalgia, your chronic pain be made better with a drug or a surgical procedure or an injection, I hate to tell you this, but you're not going to get better in all likelihood with those therapies. And I have to say this very carefully, but if you insist on believing that those sort of quick fixes are going to be the way that you need to treat chronic pain, then you are part of the problem. Then if we as doctors can't get you to do some of these non-drug therapies, can't get you to go to websites and try different cognitive behavioral approaches, then you as a patient are not nearly as likely to get better as the patient that goes from doctor to doctor waiting for the magical drug, or the magical surgical procedure, or the magical injection. This room is filled with people that know that there's no magical drug, no magical surgical procedure, and no magical injection. And the way you have to get better if you have chronic pain is to just keep moving forward, keep persevering, and trying a lot of new therapies. One of the things that I spend a lot of my time doing these days is trying to convince insurance companies and large employers and third-party payers that they need to reimburse more for those non-pharmacologic therapies, because those therapies are actually now the mainstay of our treatment of chronic pain, but yet third-party payers often still have their head in the sand and will reimburse if patients need MRI after MRI, injection after injection, surgery after surgery, but won't reimburse a couple $100s for someone to go to a cognitive behavioral therapy class or a yoga class or a Tai Chi class. And that's wrong, and that will eventually change, but in the meantime, you as patients also need to advocate for access to those therapies, for reimbursement of those therapies, because that, as the pendulum swings away from opioids and surgical procedures and injections for treating chronic pain, it is swinging towards a lot of these non-pharmacologic therapies being extremely helpful and things that people need to try as part of this journey of trying to get improvement for their chronic pain. So how many of you have gone to a doctor when you had pain in an area of your body and they did an x-ray and they said there's nothing wrong? Okay. So one of the things I'm going to try to explain to you today is why we can't see pain on an x-ray. Why so many of you have gone to doctors and had x-rays or had MRIs where there was quote-unquote nothing wrong. But this is a big point of emphasis of mine. I spend a lot of time going around the world and teaching doctors and other healthcare providers how to manage chronic pain. And I always show this slide first in every talk that I ever give. And these are two different individuals' knee x-rays. And you don't have to be a doctor or a radiologist to know that the one on the right probably is bad and the one on the left probably is good. If you look at that x-ray on the left, you see that black stripe between the big bone on the top of the femur and the smaller bone on the bottom, the tibia? That's cartilage. The cartilage doesn't show up on an x-ray. And so that black shadow in the middle of that x-ray on the left means that someone still has a lot of cartilage at the end of their femur or at the top of their tibia, and that's why we see that big black stripe. If you move over to the x-ray on the right, that person has severe osteoarthritis. Osteoarthritis is the 800-pound gorilla in the chronic pain space. Everyone will develop osteoarthritis if you live to be old enough. It is the wear and tear arthritis that most Americans develop by the time they're age 60 or 70, especially in weight-bearing joints like the knee or the hip. And so the x-ray on the left is an entirely normal knee x-ray. The x-ray on the right is severe osteoarthritis. But guess how many people in the United States that have that x-ray on the right, have lost all their cartilage and have bone rubbing against bone? Guess what percentage of those people actually are experiencing pain? Only about half. It's actually about 60% of people with that x-ray will be experiencing pain. But what's striking is how 40% of people that have that x-ray don't have any pain. And how 10 or 20% of people, like the x-ray on the left, have severe pain, even though there's nothing wrong with their x-ray. Why is that? How is that? Why is there such a disparity between what we see on an x-ray with respect to evidence of arthritis and whether someone's experiencing pain or not? Well, I'll try to tell you that today, but I will give you a hint, is that the fundamental problem is that sort of the degree of fibromyalgia that people have is really sort of a measure of what their volume control setting or what their gain setting is for how pain sensitive they are. And what we now have come to find out is that the people who have the x-ray like the one on the right and don't have any pain are individuals that are actually just pain insensitive people. They don't hurt no matter what happens to them. Now you're going to hate me when I say this, but I'm one of those people. Never had a headache in my life, never had to go to a doctor for pain, never had an x-ray except when I had broken bones when I was growing up in Warren and I was doing stupid stuff as a child. But I've never had chronic pain, and in fact, about 60% of the US population rarely or ever has any pain, whereas about 30% of the population has a lot of chronic pain. And they didn't, most of those individuals didn't start by having fibromyalgia. They started like Sharon did when they were in their childhood or their teens with painful menstrual periods or growing pains or abdominal pain or pain in different areas of the body. And they went to doctors, doctors did x-rays, doctors couldn't find anything wrong, and those individuals marched through life, and the pain moved to different areas of the body, which forced them to go to other doctors who did more x-rays and said, there's nothing wrong with you in this area of the body, there's nothing wrong with you in this area of the body, because the fundamental problem in most people with chronic pain, turns out, and nearly all people with fibromyalgia, is not in the knee or the elbow or the abdomen or the area of the body where you're experiencing pain. The fundamental problem is in the brain, and most chronic pain conditions, and especially fibromyalgia, are really much more so brain disorders than they are problems in the area of the body where you're experiencing pain. So if you do an x-ray of the area of the body where you're experiencing pain, you're not going to find anything wrong. And if you treat the area of the body where you're experiencing pain with an injection or a surgical procedure, and that isn't where the pain is coming from, you're not going to get better. How many of you had surgical procedures that were supposed to make your pain better that didn't make your pain better? How many of you have had injections that were supposed to make your pain better that didn't make your pain better? This, again, is pointing out that the U.S. healthcare system, especially because of how subspecialized we are, when you go into a doctor, especially a subspecialist, they focus on that area of the body they're responsible for. They focus on that area of the body where you're experiencing pain at the time that you're going in to see them, but they don't do a history of the fact that you have had pain in different areas of the body since you were in your teens, and put together, as I can, like a pain researcher, the fact that this isn't a problem that you developed at age 30 or 35 or 40 when you were diagnosed as having fibromyalgia. You were either born with a high volume control setting, or you acquired a high volume control setting over the course of your lifetime, and that's why you're experiencing pain throughout your entire body, not because there's damage or inflammation in all these areas of the body where you're experiencing pain. So let me expand on this. But let me just show you first that when I talk about osteoarthritis of the knee, it's morphed from being 30 years or so ago the classic peripheral pain condition. When I was trained as a rheumatologist at Georgetown University in the late 80s, early 90s, I was taught that osteoarthritis was the classic peripheral pain condition, that if you saw bone rubbing against bone on the x-ray, that person would always hurt. And if you saw a normal x-ray, that person would never hurt. That's totally wrong. I just told you that and showed you those data. But even though I'm using osteoarthritis as an example of the fact that there's a terrible relationship between what you see on an x-ray and whether someone's experiencing pain, there's not a single chronic pain condition where there is a good relationship between what you see on an x-ray or an MRI in the area of the body where the person's experiencing pain and whether the person's experiencing pain or how severe the pain is going to be. So let me, again, expand on this and tell you why there is this tremendous disparity. But if we didn't know for sure that the problem in arthritis of the knee isn't always in the knee, 30% of people that have knee replacement surgery and in whom we put a brand new shiny titanium knee don't have improvements in their pain. That should tell us that there's something flawed with our model of the disease when such a high proportion of people that have that area of the body completely replaced don't have improvements in pain. So now I will talk about fibromyalgia. There are a lot of things we got wrong about fibromyalgia as well. The first thing we got wrong about fibromyalgia is that it occurred almost exclusively in women. And the second thing we got wrong about fibromyalgia is that we should count how many tender points people have to diagnose fibromyalgia. How many of you have had a tender point count? So tender point counts are totally stupid. Because the whole person's tender. It doesn't matter where you push in someone with fibromyalgia.
Thank you.
You can push in the forehead, the thumbnail, anywhere you push in someone with fibromyalgia, they're more tender. But to a scientist, when you see, instead of there just being 18 red dots where the tender points were, that the whole person is tender, that taught us something about fibromyalgia. That taught us that the fundamental problem was more likely to be in the central nervous system with how people are perceiving pain rather than in all these areas of the body where people are tender. And now the new criteria for fibromyalgia don't in any way require that we do a tender point count. And in fact, if I want to know if someone is tender, I can ask them, does it bother you if you sit in a chair for a prolonged period of time? Most of you are already having pain in your back and your buttocks when you're sitting in a soft chair for 30 minutes. That doesn't hurt me. I hate to tell you that. Most of you have pain when someone inflates a blood pressure cuff. A lot of you have pain if you wear tight clothing, if someone hugs you. That means you're diffusely tender. I don't have to push in 18 stupid areas of the body to tell you that you're tender. But that also is telling us something about the fundamental problem in fibromyalgia. If the person is diffusely tender, then by far the easiest way to explain that is that the nerves throughout the entire body are more sensitive, not just in these 18 areas of the body that we call tender points. Another thing that I'll try to dissuade you of that we got wrong about fibromyalgia is that people either have fibromyalgia or they don't have fibromyalgia. Is that everyone has a little bit of fibromyalgia sometimes, and some people have a lot of fibromyalgia all the time. But we really shouldn't be thinking of it as yes or no, because different people have different elements or degrees of fibromyalgia, and a lot of people who don't quite meet criteria for fibromyalgia still have a high volume control setting, and they might have as their primary disease osteoarthritis of the knee, but if they have osteoarthritis of the knee plus they have a fair degree of fibromyalgia, their knee is going to hurt a lot more than someone that has that same knee that doesn't have any fibromyalgia. And we can help that person with osteoarthritis plus a little bit of fibromyalgia as much by giving them drug and non-drug therapies that are going to turn down their volume control setting in their brain as we can by giving them drug and non-drug treatments that are going to be working out in their knee. And so I'll talk about that, and I'll actually show you some studies that we've done at the University of Michigan that show that the degree of fibromyalgia that someone has, irrespective of whether they meet criteria for fibromyalgia, and you can say that is a person that has fibromyalgia, the degree of fibromyalgia that someone has, the more fibromyalgia people have, the less well opioids work to treat their pain, and the less well surgery works to treat their pain, because the problem is in the brain, and opioids and surgery and injections don't work for brain pain. These things are more likely to make brain pain worse rather than make brain pain better. And in fact, fibromyalgia has become the poster child for a whole new third mechanism of pain that we didn't know about until about 20 or so years ago. So if you look at this chart here, the two types of pain on the left side of the chart we've known about forever. Nociceptive pain is the scientific term for you hurt because there's some damage or inflammation in the area of the body where you're feeling pain. You hit your thumb with a hammer, you burn yourself, you get in a motor vehicle accident. You hurt because there's damage or inflammation in those areas of the body, and that kind of pain is called nociceptive pain. You can also hurt because the nerves that bring information from the areas of your body back to the central nervous system, if those nerves are pinched, like in sciatica or carpal tunnel syndrome, or if those nerves are damaged because you get chemotherapy drugs or you're a heavy alcohol user, that's called neuropathic pain or nerve pain. And we've known about those two kinds of pain forever. But in the last 20 years, we've realized that the most common underlying mechanism of pain is the underlying mechanism that is causing fibromyalgia, brain pain, or pain that is occurring because the volume control is set too high in the central nervous system. It's not just fibromyalgia now that is thought to be primarily due to an increased volume control in the brain. It's interstitial cystitis, irritable bowel, endometriosis, vulvodynia, low back pain, TMJ disorder, and I could go on and on and on and list, but there are now about 10 different medical conditions that the National Institutes of Health calls chronic overlapping pain conditions, fibromyalgia being the poster child of these, where all of those are thought to be really have the same similar cause of an increased volume control in the central nervous system. And those labels like low back pain or irritable bowel or interstitial cystitis merely indicate the region of the body the person is experiencing pain. But the fundamental problem in all of those people is a high volume control setting in the brain that causes people to be more pain sensitive throughout the entire body. And it just so happens that when you are more pain sensitive in your bladder, the term urologist would use to describe that as interstitial cystitis. When you're more pain sensitive in your bowel, that's irritable bowel. When you're more sensitive in your face, that's temporomandibular joint disorder. But those are not unique entities with respect to what causes them. Those are really all caused by the same fundamental problem, and they're just different diagnostic labels that some of you have accumulated over the course of your lifetime as your pain has moved from one area of the body to another, because your fundamental problem is in your brain, not in the area of the body where you're experiencing pain. So let me use an analogy to perhaps explain this to you better, that the amount of pain that a person is experiencing is exactly like the loudness of an electric guitar. And there are two ways you can make an electric guitar to be louder. You can strum the strings harder, or you can turn up the amplifier. So in this analogy, the strings on the electric guitar are exactly like the sensory nerves that you have going to all the different areas of your body, for example, the knee. You have some nerves that pick up heat and cold. You have some nerves that pick up pressure. You have some nerves that pick up inflammation. And those nerves pick up qualitatively different information about what's going on in your knee, and then send that information from your knee through the spinal cord upward to the brain to tell you what's going on in your knee. And if you strum one of those strings harder, i.e. you activate one of those nerves, that sends an impulse up to your brain to be felt as pain. But the other way you can make an electric guitar louder is to turn up the amplifier. And in fact, the primary determinant of the loudness of an electric guitar is what the amplifier is set at. And in this analogy, your amplifier for pain processing is your spinal cord and your brain. If you have fibromyalgia, how many of you saw the movie This is Spinal Tap? Where the volume control and the amplifier is set at 11 instead of on a 1 to 10 scale. You have a volume control setting of 11 if you have fibromyalgia. Your brain is hypersensitive. You feel everything that's going on throughout your entire body that people like myself that have low amplifier settings simply don't feel. Let me tell you all a secret about yourself. These areas of the brain that code for how sensitive you are to pain around your body also code how sensitive you are to different sensory stimuli. Those of you who have a high volume control setting in your brain for pain also find lights to be brighter, noises to be louder, odors to be more bothersome. You have a lot of side effects of drugs because you're hypersensitive to a lot of drugs. This volume control problem in your brain is not just for your volume control for the pain in your knee, it sets the volume control for all sensory information that comes in through your eyes, your nose, your ears. And that hypersensitivity to all sensory information makes up this long list of symptoms that people with fibromyalgia experience. Let me just tell you about a random symptom. Why do so many of you have to go to the bathroom so many times a day? That might sound like a really odd question to ask you. Why is that? Do you think it's because you all drink a lot more water than me? No. Your bladder is more sensitive. Your bladder feels like it's full when it has 150 or 200 cc's of urine in it. My bladder doesn't feel like it's full till it has 350 or 400 cc's of urine in it. So you urinate more often because you sense a full bladder before I do. You sense stuff in your abdomen that I can't sense. When you eat a meal, that you will feel food going through your abdomen. But this hypersensitivity of nerves throughout your entire body helps explain a lot of the bizarre symptoms that people with fibromyalgia experience because, again, the fundamental problem is that throughout your entire body, you're hypersensitive to any types of sensory stimuli because your amplifier is set very high. This is just another way of showing this in a sort of classic scientific diagram, is that the amount of pain sensitivity or sensory sensitivity that people in the population have is a bell-shaped curve. There's some people in the middle of the bell-shaped curve that have sort of average pain sensitivity. But the further you are to the right side of that bell-shaped curve, the more tender you are, the more pain sensitive you are, the more sensory sensitive you are, the more pain you're going to have over the course of your lifetime because your amplifier is set too high. You don't have to have anything wrong with your knee for it to hurt, just like you don't have anything wrong with your back and your buttock right now for it to be hurting. It's hurting because your nerves throughout your entire body are more sensitive, and that's why people don't see why you're hurting on an x-ray, because we can't do the kinds of x-ray that our research group can do of the brain, where we can look at the function of the brain using functional MRI. Those tests are not available in clinical care or in clinical practice. So there's no way for any doctor to do a test on you that says your volume control is increased, and thus you may not have any imaging studies that are abnormal because the only imaging studies that are done are pictures of the areas of the body where you're experiencing pain, and that's not where your problem lies. Now, Fred Wolf is a rheumatologist. If any of you follow the medical literature, Sharon, I'm sure, follows the medical literature, Fred Wolf and I are enemies. Fred Wolf believes that you still are all neurotic middle-aged women. I've debated Fred a couple times. I've laid him out on the stage after debating him. He won't debate me anymore. But I like giving Fred credit for the one thing he got right about fibromyalgia, and that is we shouldn't think of it as yes or no. We should think of it as a continuum, and that different people have different degrees of fibromyalgia. And even people that don't have fibromyalgia, when they're under a lot of stress, when they don't sleep very well, when they're inactive for prolonged periods of time, their fibromyalgia-ness can get turned up so that they become more sensitive to lights and they hurt more. And so this isn't just in people that have fibromyalgia. This seems to be sort of a normal physiologic process in the body. And people's degree of fibromyalgia can go up and down over the course of their lifetime, depending on a lot of things that are happening to them in their life, whether they're exercising regularly, whether they're sleeping and getting deep sleep, whether they're under a lot of stress, or what genes they were born with. They were unlucky enough to born with that might be turning up their volume control setting. But the bottom line is the amount of fibromyalgia that a person has isn't constant over the course of their lifetime, and we shouldn't think of fibromyalgia as a yes or no. We should really think of it as more like a volume control setting or an amplifier setting that we can change over the course of people's lifetime. And the reason I'm so aggressive at the end of my talk about talking about if you're a fibromyalgia patient, you have to try to get a little more active. Start walking, start moving around. You don't have to exercise, you just have to get more active. And you have to try to get deeper sleep. Is it become that activity and deep sleep are the body's two most potent analgesic systems. Is that people who sleep better are less tender, people who are more active are less tender, and so we're trying to use sleep and activity as a way of turning down your volume control setting. We're not chiding you for being inactive just to make you feel guilty that because you have chronic pain, you've become sort of a couch potato and you don't move anymore. One of the analogies that I use to describe this to patients, you already hate me because I said I never feel like a chronic pain patient. I was sort of lying to you. There are 2 days a year that I feel exactly like a fibromyalgia patient, and that's because I lead service trips to Kenya twice a year. But when I get off the 24-hour plane flight in Nairobi every year, I feel like crap. I hurt all over, I'm tired, I'm miserable. Why is it that I feel terrible? Because I have had to sit and not move for 24 hours. Some of you have been on a plane for a couple decades. You've got to get off the plane. You've got to, I can't emphasize this enough. You don't have to do Jane Fonda, Richard Simmons jumping around exercise, but you have to become more active. That is one of the critical things we need patients to do in the overall management of any chronic pain condition, especially chronic pain conditions like fibromyalgia. But now that we've abandoned tender points, here's the new criteria for fibromyalgia. Just take out a sheet of paper and you can see what your fibromyalgia score is. On the left side of this sheet of paper, we look for how many different areas of the body people have pain. The more different regions of the body you have pain in, the more likely your pain is coming from your brain. Because again, going back to my guitar analogy, if the amplifier is turned up high, any of the strings will be louder and any of the places in your body can be more painful. So after people fill out the left side of this diagram and we see how many of these different boxes they check that they've had pain in that area of the body over the last week, they move to the right side of the diagram and we ask them about symptoms that very commonly occur when someone's volume control is set too high, because when your volume control in your brain is set too high, there's other symptoms that come from your brain, like fatigue, sleep problems, and memory problems. And so what this new fibromyalgia measure is doing is looking at how widespread someone's pain is by having them check boxes on the left, and then it's asking them, do you have fatigue? And if you have fatigue, if you say fatigue is no problem, you get a 0 score. If fatigue is a slight problem, you get a 1. If fatigue is a moderate problem, you get a 2. And if fatigue is severe, you get a 3. And then you score sleep problems and memory problems in that same 0, 1, 2, 3. So you can get a score from 0 to 9 based on a 0 to 3 score for how severe your fatigue is, how severe your sleep problems are, and how severe your memory problems are. And then you move to the bottom right part of it, and you answer these 3 questions. You have pain in your abdomen, which is irritable bowel. If you check yes, you get 1. If you have depression, you check yes, you get 1. And if you get headaches, you check yes, and you get 1. So there's a total of 31 points that you can have on this fibromyalgia measure. And if you have a score of 13 or greater, you have fibromyalgia. Most of you who have been diagnosed with fibromyalgia, if you complete this in your head, you probably have scores of 15 to 20. But I'll show you some data in just a moment that if someone has a score of 7 or 8 or 9, that also is an illness in and of itself, because that person is going to be less responsive to opioids, less responsive to surgery, less responsive to injection than someone who else is in the audience who has a fibromyalgia score of 2 or 3 or 4. This really does seem to give a measure of what someone's amplifier setting is by scoring from 0 to 31. And the higher that score, the more likely it is that you're likely to benefit from drug and non-drug treatments that turn down your amplifier in your brain, rather than drug or non-drug treatments that are aimed at your knee or your elbow or the area of the body where you're experiencing pain. Again, let me use an analogy here. Let's imagine you're an orthopedic surgeon, a well-meaning orthopedic surgeon that only does surgery when he or she thinks people are really going to benefit from surgery. And someone comes into you with severe knee pain, and they have that x-ray like I showed you on the right, where they've lost all their cartilage and they have bone rubbing against bone. Are you going to offer to do knee replacement surgery on that person? Yeah, you should. What if that's the person whose knee you replace? How much better is that person going to get better if you replace their knee? That's a fibromyalgia patient. I'm only showing these to be, to make a point, that you can sort of intuitively see that the two ends of this continuum, someone who might only have pain in his or her knee versus someone who has a pain diagram like this, the person who only has pain in one area of the body, it's a lot more likely that that surgery is going to help that person than this person. But I'll show you some data in a couple minutes that shows that actually everything in between is important as well, and that the people that meet criteria for fibromyalgia, that Mrs. Jones has fibromyalgia, are sort of the tip of the iceberg. Many of you who came to this lecture today have the diagnosis of fibromyalgia, but there are way more people out in the U.S. population that have elements of fibromyalgia superimposed upon osteoarthritis, rheumatoid arthritis, lupus, sickle cell disease, any number of other chronic pain conditions where there actually is something wrong with their x-ray, but the fibromyalgia they have makes what is going on in their knee much more painful, because superimposed upon something wrong with their knee, they also have this high amplifier setting. And these individuals often are not at all recognized in clinical practice. Once people make the diagnosis of osteoarthritis, they put blinders on and say that all of that person's problem is in the knee, and they don't think of fibromyalgia or fibromyalgia-ness as being a component of that person's pain that very much could respond to treatments aimed at their underlying fibromyalgia. So I'm a scientist. I'm sorry, but I like showing data to people. So let me just show you some studies that we've done at the University of Michigan that really have made a big deal in the broader pain field. These studies have actually convinced a lot of people that were disbelievers about fibromyalgia that it was real, because a lot of physicians actually much more so buy into this notion that different people have different volume control settings and different pain sensitivity, and rather than thinking of fibromyalgia as yes or no, they much prefer thinking of it as more of a continuum and thinking of different people having different degrees of fibromyalgia. But these studies that I'm going to show you here, the main hypothesis that we had was that in people getting knee replacement surgery or women getting a hysterectomy for chronic pelvic pain, that the higher their fibromyalgia score was, the less likely that surgery would help their pain, because again, remember, we're taking out a uterus and we're fixing a knee. If that person's pain is coming from the brain, then that's not going to work. But our hypothesis were that if the higher the fibromyalgia score, the less likely that surgery would help these people, and the less likely that opioids would help the person, that they would need a lot more opioids to control their pain than they would need if they had a low fibromyalgia score. So in these studies, we looked at whether people were anxious and depressed and all the other things you might say could cause pain even in the absence of something wrong on someone's x-ray. The only thing that we did that was new in these studies was looked at this fibromyalgia score, and we had people complete these questionnaires the day before they had knee replacement surgery or had a hysterectomy. And then we looked at how someone's score, whether it did predict whether they got better or not after they got their knee replaced, and whether it did predict how much opioid they needed to control their pain right after they got knee replacement surgery. And it was a very strong predictor. It was a very potent predictor. For each 1 point increase in the fibromyalgia score, people needed a lot more opioids to control their acute pain. Any of you with fibromyalgia ever gone into an emergency room with a flare of your pain? It's a pretty unsatisfying experience, isn't it? Why is that? What do they give you for pain? Well, a lot of them will give you opioids. They'll give you fentanyl, and it still won't work to treat fibromyalgia pain. This pain is unresponsive to opioids. And we showed this in the study. These are the 700 or so people in the study. Let me just point out a couple things in the study. On this graph, on the bottom of the graph, what we call the x-axis, is the different people's fibromyalgia score. And on the y-axis are the number of the people in this study that had that score. So you see the biggest bar there that goes to about 110? The fibromyalgia score that was most common in this group of people that were getting knee replacement surgery at U of M was a 5. And about 110 people had a score of a 4 or a 5 or a 6. You see that red line there? That red line is a score of 13. So people on the right side of that red line would be said to have fibromyalgia, because they would have a score of 13 or greater. So I'm not going to make you add up how many people are on the right side of that red line. I will tell you that there are 55 people that were in this study at the University of Michigan that had knee replacement surgery, and that the day before we operated on their knee, we gave them this questionnaire and found out that they met criteria for fibromyalgia. 55 people. Guess how many of those 55 people had the diagnosis of fibromyalgia already made in their chart? 0. University of Michigan is arguably the epicenter for fibromyalgia research in the world. Our group is by far the best known group in the world for studying fibromyalgia. If our surgeons and our doctors at the University of Michigan are not diagnosing fibromyalgia in those 55 people that have osteoarthritis, no one's diagnosing it. As soon as someone makes diagnoses like osteoarthritis, they put blinders on and they think it's all coming from the knee. It's all coming from the joint. All the pain's coming from the area of the body where the person's experiencing pain. And our studies that have shown that even in people with osteoarthritis, that a lot of osteoarthritis pain is coming from the brain as well. Remember those annoying Cymbalta commercials that you were all getting inundated with when, for the 2 or 3 years before Cymbalta came off patent? That was because Cymbalta was shown to be effective in low back pain and in osteoarthritis of the knee. It was working in the osteoarthritis of the knee patients like that are on this graph. That the higher that someone's fibromyalgia score is when they have osteoarthritis of the knee, the more likely Cymbalta would work and the less likely surgery would work, because Cymbalta is working in the brain by turning down the volume control, whereas the surgery is working on the knee by replacing the knee. But what we're starting to get now is that by knowing someone's fibromyalgia score, the higher it is, the more of the therapies that are working in the brain that you have to use to turn down the volume control, and the lower someone's fibromyalgia score is, irrespective of what diagnostic labels they have, the more likely that injections and surgery and opioids will actually work to treat their pain. Here's 2 different knee replacement surgery patients. One patient, patient A, that had just pain in his knee and a little bit of pain in one other area of the body, so he had a fibromyalgia score of 2. The other patient, patient B, had pain in 4 body areas besides the knee, and a little bit of fatigue and a little bit of a sleep problem. That got him a fibromyalgia score of 12. But look at the difference in how much opioid that patient B needed versus patient A, and how much less likely it was that that person was going to get better if they got their knee replaced. Is it patient B needed 90 milligrams more of oral morphine equivalent to control their pain. That's a lot of Vicodin in one day to control their pain, and was 5 times less likely to have a 50% improvement of their pain 6 months after having the knee replacement surgery, which is sort of a marker for, yeah, I would want to have that surgery because it made me, my pain 50% better. So again, the higher your fibromyalgia score, I'm not telling any of you that have fibromyalgia or have high fibromyalgia scores not to have surgery for your pain, but I am telling you that it's a lot less likely to work for you than it is for someone that has a low fibromyalgia score, because just statistically speaking, more of your pain is coming from your brain, and that's not where we're operating. We're operating in the knee or the area of the body where you're experiencing pain. And again, I've already alluded to this, but the drug Cymbalta works a lot better in low back pain patients that have a high fibromyalgia score, who have multiple sites of pain other than the back. Similarly, rheumatoid arthritis patients, the drug milnacipran or Savella, one of the approved drugs for fibromyalgia, works in the rheumatoid arthritis patients in whom their inflammation is now well controlled with these powerful new drugs we have to treat autoimmunity and inflammation. But these are the individuals that still have fibromyalgia after their rheumatoid arthritis or their lupus or their ankylosing spondylitis is well controlled. So fibromyalgia, as occurring in conjunction with other diseases like osteoarthritis, lupus, any other chronic pain condition, is really what we've learned a lot about in the last 5 years or so since I last came and gave this talk. And that's why the people who meet criteria for fibromyalgia, which are many of you, are really the tip of the iceberg. And a lot of people have this problem, but still go by labels like osteoarthritis or rheumatoid arthritis or sickle cell disease, because that's the fundamental underlying disease they have. It might not be the thing that is bothering them most right now, or the way that their pain should be managed. So when we go back to this slide here of the 3 underlying mechanisms of pain, although we put fibromyalgia under centralized pain, we put diabetic painful neuropathy under nerve pain, and we put osteoarthritis under nociceptive pain, all of these conditions are mixed pain states. Is that 30% of people with osteoarthritis have more of a brain problem than they do a knee problem. And some people with fibromyalgia have a lot of stuff going on out in their periphery as well that would benefit from injections or other classes of drugs. They don't just have brain pain. So you have to look at people carefully and say, in this person, regardless of these diagnostic labels that they have, what is the evidence that they have brain pain? And here are the drugs and the non-drug therapies that are going to work best for this. And what is the evidence that they have nociceptive pain? And here are the drug and the non-drug therapies that are going to work for this underlying mechanism of pain. But we no longer can delude ourselves into thinking that all people with osteoarthritis only have nociceptive pain, all people with fibromyalgia only have brain pain, and all people with carpal tunnel syndrome or diabetic neuropathic pain only have neuropathic pain. So if you look at different chronic pain conditions, osteoarthritis, rheumatoid arthritis, SC is sickle cell disease, Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, they all fit at different points in this continuum of either on average being more of a brain problem or more of a peripheral problem. But any given person with any of those pain conditions can be either purely nociceptive pain, purely centralized, or brain pain, or what happens in many individuals is they have combinations of both. So they have a little bit wrong with their knee plus a high amplifier setting, so we have to treat the knee plus the amplifier to make that person better, rather than thinking that we're going to be entirely able to treat the guitar and make all pain better. And so I'm going to go really quickly through some of the studies that show objective evidence of this increased volume control setting in fibromyalgia. And it has been incredibly useful over the course of my career to have brains with bright colored blobs that I can show physicians to convince them that fibromyalgia is real. Because these studies really do show that people with fibromyalgia have this really high volume control setting. These are the first functional MRI studies ever done in fibromyalgia. They were done while our group was still at Georgetown in the year 2000. And they showed the first objective evidence that you're not neurotic middle-aged women. That we actually could see on functional MRI that when we gave people with fibromyalgia very light pressure to their thumbnail, and they said that hurts even though it wasn't very much pressure, we could see on functional MRI that they were hurting when we put them in a brain scanner, because we could see that the areas of the brain that light up when people have pain were lighting up in the fibromyalgia patients when they had that very light amount of pressure, and it took twice as much pressure in the healthy controls to get the same amount of pain. But basically the fibromyalgia brain on 2.5 kilograms of pressure looked identical to the healthy control brain with 5 kilograms of pressure. Is that people with fibromyalgia had sort of double the amplifier setting, and we could see this objectively. And this study and other studies that our group did in the early 2000s helped convince drug companies that fibromyalgia was a real disease and they should actually try to get drugs approved for use in fibromyalgia. So I don't love the Lyrica commercials any more than you do, but Lyrica and Cymbalta and Savella, the 3 drugs that were approved for use in fibromyalgia, can all be helpful in about 1/3 of the people that we give them to. But drugs alone are rarely the do-all and the end-all for any chronic pain condition, and they're rarely the do-all or the end-all for people with fibromyalgia. We've moved on past just showing that people with fibromyalgia are more pain sensitive. We can look at the degree to which different brain regions are either too connected to each other or not connected enough to each other. We can even look at the size and the shape of the brain. If you have had chronic pain for a long period of time, your brain looks different than someone who hasn't had chronic pain. Your brain tries to shrink a lot of these areas of the brain that are involved in pain processing, because if the brain shrunk that area, then maybe the brain could somehow reduce its own pain. This is called neuroplasticity, where the nervous system is trying to remodel itself to come back towards average or come back towards normal. But this is also one of the reasons that it's hard to treat chronic pain, is that as you remodel your nervous system, as you've had chronic pain for years and decades, we're not going to just be able to snap our fingers and make this go away. It takes a long time to undo what it takes years and years and years to get to as a chronic pain patient. And again, if you keep holding out for that magical drug or that magical surgical procedure, you are going to be the chronic pain patient that's holding out for getting better, because we don't have it. I'd give it to you, if we had it. So these are the drugs that work to treat brain pain, and these are entirely different than the drugs that work to treat pain that's coming from your knee. Look down at the bottom of the slide here, and you see opioids and steroids, which work to treat inflammation, and non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs. Those drugs work really good, or really well, I should say. I went to the University of Michigan. At least I realized my grammatical errors. Those drugs work really well if your pain is coming from your knee, but they don't work at all if your knee is coming from your brain. And instead, you have to use the drugs like, as I point to them up at the top, I'll give you the brand names because you're more likely to know the brand names. Amitriptyline is Elavil. Cyclobenzaprine is Flexeril. Flexeril is my favorite drug for fibromyalgia. If you have fibromyalgia and you have never tried nighttime Flexeril, 5, 10, 15 milligrams of Flexeril, just at bedtime, a single dose 2 to 3 hours before bedtime, go to your doctor and ask if he or she would prescribe Flexeril. A low dose of Flexeril a couple hours before bedtime is incredibly inexpensive, and it used to be thought that Flexeril was a muscle relaxant. That many of you have probably taken Flexeril as a muscle relaxant, but not taking it regularly a couple hours before bedtime. It'll help you sleep deeper. One of the good things that Flexeril does is get you into deep sleep. When you start taking Flexeril, the first couple nights you take Flexeril, you may have vivid dreams and nightmares. That's good. It means you're finally going into deep sleep after maybe not getting deep sleep for a long time. Stick with it. Stay on that low dose of 5 milligrams of Flexeril for a couple weeks, and sometimes then go up to 10 milligrams of Flexeril a couple hours before bedtime. But I guarantee you that almost any physician would be willing to prescribe Flexeril because they use it very often as a muscle relaxant and as a drug that they use for other types of things. The next line of drugs are milnacipran is Cybella, duloxetine is Cymbalta, venlafaxine is Effexor, and then the third line are pregabalin is Lyrica, gabapentin is Neurontin. All those drugs can be helpful, and those are the drugs that are most helpful in fibromyalgia, but often we have to have people on a little bit of Lyrica or Neurontin, a little bit of duloxetine, and a little bit of Flexeril. That just like we use different drugs in combination to treat high blood pressure and congestive heart failure and cancer, we often have to use different types of drugs together to treat chronic pain. Many of you are on too many drugs, and a lot of the drugs are causing a lot of side effects, but a logical addition of one drug at a time, keeping if it works, discarding if it doesn't work, will often lead to being on several of these classes of drugs simultaneously, and a lot of people get more benefit from being on 2 or 3 of these classes of drugs than on none of these drugs. Let me talk really quickly about 2 classes of drugs here, opioids and cannabinoids. Opioids. I hate opioids. Why do I hate opioids? You would think I hate opioids because 50 to 60,000 people in the United States are dying of opioid overdoses. I don't like that, but the thing I hate about opioids is that we in the U.S. were misled into thinking that opioids worked to treat chronic pain. We gave opioids to a lot of chronic pain patients. They transiently felt better when they first started taking the opioids, and then as the opioid dose was increased and increased, unknowingly to the person, the opioids were actually making that person's pain worse rather than better, but the patient couldn't see that. And so we have millions of chronic pain patients in the U.S. that are on opioids that think that the opioids are helping them more than the opioids are helping them. They come into us and we ask them, what is your pain level on a 0 to 10 scale? 9, 10. What are you able to do in an average day? Nothing. I just sit around an average day. Would you ever consider tapering your opioids because I'm not sure that they're helping you at all? No, I need my opioids. I'm having a hard time figuring out what these opioids are doing good to you. Think back to when you weren't on these high doses of opioids. What was your pain score like before you went on opioids? What was your functional status like before you went on opioids? What opioids have, the way opioids work to treat pain is by causing a chemical lobotomy. They literally don't do anything to get rid of pain, they just make you not care about pain. But that's the problem with people with chronic pain on opioids. They don't care about anything. They don't care, they basically are dissociated from life. because of the opioids that they're on. And am I here to scare you if you're on high-dose opioids and you have chronic pain? Yeah, I am. If you are a chronic pain patient that is on opioids, your risk of dying in the next calendar year is 50% higher than the person sitting next to you that is the same as you but does not have chronic pain and is not on an opioid. That's called all-cause mortality. All-cause mortality, like all the things you can die of in a year, just being on an opioid makes it 50% more likely that you are going to die next year than if you're not on an opioid. That bothers me, especially when I can't see that opioids are a benefit to most patients with chronic pain. The risk of taking opioids is substantial. The benefit of opioids for most patients is nil. And the last thing I will tell you is a slow, gradual taper of opioids rarely leads to a worsening of pain. I would recommend when we break out into the question and answer session, some of the patients that are in the room that taper their opioids, please raise your hand. And even if you, not now. And again, I don't want to get mired in this, but I think it's really powerful when some of you in the room that were on, that have chronic pain, that have fibromyalgia, that were on opioids and moderate to high doses of opioids, and you came down on your dose of the opioids, it's helpful for you to tell other people in the room that your pain didn't get worse, because the average is that 80 or 90% of people with chronic pain that are on an opioid that slowly, gradually taper their opioids say that their pain stays about the same, but they feel a lot better when they're not on that opioid. They're not constipated, their personality isn't changed, they're not dulled to what's going on in the world. And the other problem when people are taking opioids is they don't like doing the non-drug therapies. They don't like becoming more active. They can't sleep well at night because opioids keep you in a superficial state of sleep. And so, yes, I hate opioids. Yes, I wish that many of you who are on moderate to high doses of opioid, I don't care if you're taking a hydrocodone or a Vicodin or a Tylenol number 3 or a Percocet a couple times on a bad day. What I care about is you're taking an opioid every day for your pain. You have slowly, gradually increased your dose of your opioids. Those are the people with chronic pain that I worry about, because those are the people that are at highest risk of developing side effects of opioids like death, and those are the people that are least likely to be benefiting from the opioid. Now let's move on to talking about medical marijuana. I have to be careful on this side of town with Trump jokes. But I couldn't believe that that they let me use this in a recent editorial I wrote in a pain journal about opioids. I used his line that he said about healthcare, is whoever thought it was this complicated, to talk about some of the problems that we run into with opioids. But it literally is the case that we just didn't understand all the downstream consequences of giving people high-dose opioids for long periods of time. And we're just seeing this as a country now, and we're seeing this especially in the chronic pain space. So please go to the internet and watch the 1 minute and 20-second trailer for Reefer Madness. Oh, you can hear it. So before coming to this lecture, what side of the continuum were you on the Cheech and Chong side that you thought cannabis was helpful, or on the Reefer Madness side that you thought it was unhelpful? So it turns out that cannabis can be very helpful for treating chronic pain, but it is not at all the way that people are using it. One of the problems with the medical marijuana laws like we have in the state of Michigan is that there's no provision for educating physicians or patients about how to use marijuana. So I have a disclaimer to make. Remember my original conflict of interest slide where I talked about consulting I did with pharmaceutical companies? I went to the University of Michigan in the 70s. I smoked a ton of pot. Recreationally. Recreational use of marijuana is totally different than medicinal use of marijuana. And what we're learning about marijuana is that low doses of marijuana can be effective to treat pain. And there's two constituents in marijuana, THC, which is the psychoactive component of marijuana, and CBD. And it actually turns out that CBD, which is not psychoactive at all, and in fact protects against the high that you get from the THC in marijuana, might be the more active ingredient to treat pain. So if you are thinking about going the medical marijuana route, here is some practical advice for using cannabinoids in the year 2018, is first try CBD alone. You can actually get CBD from Amazon that is extracted from hemp, not from cannabis. It's not totally legal, but Amazon is selling it and the DEA isn't enforcing it, so if you don't want to go through the trouble of getting a medical marijuana card, you can get CBD that is extracted from hemp over the internet from Amazon. If you want to get a medical marijuana card, so you completely understand what the law does, if you take that form to your physician, they are not recommending that you use marijuana, and they are certainly not prescribing marijuana. Marijuana is a Schedule I drug. That is stupid. It needs to change because we can't do research in marijuana because of it still being a Schedule I drug. But having said that, the law in the state of Michigan, all the physician is doing is attesting to the fact that you have chronic pain, and the chronic pain is one of the diagnoses that makes you eligible for a medical marijuana card. There's a different agency in the state that comes up with new diseases for which you are eligible for a medical marijuana card. The original diseases were things like glaucoma and epilepsy and pain. Autism was just added a month or so ago as a disease for which you could use medical marijuana. But this is a really exciting area. Cannabinoids are an exciting area, but a lot of the medicinal benefit of cannabinoids is from CBD, not from THC. And if you get a card and you go to your doctor isn't going to be able to tell you anything. No doctors know anything about this unless I have given them a lecture. Because none of us learn anything about this system in medical school. And then the other problem is that if you go to a dispensary, the dispensaries are catering to the recreational users, not the medicinal users. And you will get a very high THC strain of marijuana. You will get like a 10-to-1 THC to CBD strain of marijuana. For what you should be using if you have chronic pain is a 10-to-1 CBD to THC strain that just has a tiny little bit of THC in it and has a lot of CBD in it. But that's not what you're going to hear from your doctor because they don't know, and that's not what you're going to hear from the dispensary because they don't have any of that, because that's not what the recreational users want, because that doesn't make you high. So you really will want to search out some of the dispensaries that are really trying to cater to the real medicinal user, and you'll want to really try CBD alone and then add a little bit of THC. But most people that are trying marijuana for pain are overshooting the dose. They're using way too much THC. A little bit of THC actually works better than a lot of THC. A lot of THC makes you high. That's good if you're trying to get high if you're a recreational user. A little bit of THC is what you need to treat chronic pain. And so I want to end by showing this slide about how important all the non-drug therapies are to treat chronic pain. Because the longer you have chronic pain, the more of these downstream consequences of chronic pain you develop. You get higher levels of stress, you become inactive, you start sleeping poor, you develop bad habits that you don't know are making your pain worse. Those are all things that make your pain worse and worse. Those things over the years, the more inactive you become, the higher your volume control becomes. The poorer you sleep, the higher your volume control becomes. The more stressed you get, the higher your volume control becomes. All of these things that happen to you as a result of having chronic pain turn up your volume control higher and higher, and these are things that we need to use non-drug therapies to treat. We got to get people active again. We got to get them sleeping again. We don't know the role that obesity is playing in fibromyalgia pain, but we do know that if you hurt in weight-bearing joints like the knee or the hip, if you can lose 10 pounds, the pain in those joints will probably get better. And we do know that people develop bad habits that psychologists call maladaptive illness behaviors. And if we can point out some of those bad habits that you're doing to survive having chronic pain, but those things actually make your pain worse, if we can get you to stop doing those things, that can make your pain better without giving you a drug, giving you a surgical procedure, all the side effects, all the costs. And our group developed a website about 10 years or so ago called Fibroguide. This is free. We tested this website in people with fibromyalgia, and the website alone, compared to no website, worked better than any of the drugs that are approved for use in fibromyalgia. And all it does is give people different suggestions for things they can do themselves to make themselves better. So I really plead with you, go to this website, try some of these non-drug therapies. This is really now what those of us that are pain researchers think are the most effective treatments for chronic pain. See if you can get off of some of your drugs, especially opioids, and really substitute those drugs with some of the non-pharmacologic approaches, some of which you can do your own with things like Fibroguide. Others you're going to need guidance from other different healthcare providers, but find a physical therapist that can help you develop an exercise or an activity program. Work with a cognitive behavioral therapist or a psychologist on cognitive behavioral therapy. Learn mindfulness, Tai Chi, yoga, meditation. These are all things that can be helpful. Try them. You'd be surprised the degree to which that you'll find one of these things that really works well for you. You'll retain that, and you will be able to start to shed some of these drugs because you'll realize that they actually are not helping you as much as you thought they were. And a lot of them are having a lot of untoward side effects, with opioids being the worst. But a lot of our medications, even Lyrica now, is becoming a popular street drug. Go figure. Those of you who take Lyrica and wonder why anyone would want to take Lyrica. But Lyrica now has street value. Lyrica has street value because it causes people to be sort of dizzy-headed, and people are going after just being dissociated from reality, whether that's any number of drugs they might be able to take that dissociate them from what's going on in their lives. So I will stop there and take questions. Thank you. Yes.
I noticed that some therapies I've tried, I did the acupuncture. I was like a poster child for acupuncture, worked, had all my friends try it. Within 6 months, it wasn't as effective. Why is that? Does your brain get used to that?
So the question was that
Some of the remedies are short-term for me.
right. That she found some benefit initially from acupuncture. It wasn't sustained. That can happen with any of our therapies, whether they're drug or non-drug therapy. Sometimes people will find a given therapy that always works for them, keeps working for them. Other times it'll work for a while, and then they have to move on and try something new, something different. But again, that's true of the drug and the non-drug treatments. You know, you just have to try to keep moving forward as a patient. Mrs. Moyer, I know one person in the room. I know two people in the room. Former neighbors from a couple, from my Warren days.
What do you think about the holistic health doctors? Just question.
In general, I'm a holistic person myself. Now, some of them are quacks.
Right.
Some of them, instead of trying to peddle opioids, they come in and they're trying to sell you a bunch of nutritional supplements that have no proven value. So, you know, one of the ways to judge a doctor is follow the money. If you go to a website and there's a testimonial with 3 women smiling and saying, I had terrible fibromyalgia, I was bedridden, and I took Dr. Jones's magical pills, and now I'm cured of fibromyalgia. And that, it always will have like a place where they can take your credit card at the bottom, the pay account thing at the bottom. You got to run away from those. If it sounds too good to be true, it's too good to be true. But if what the doctor is offering is more, what I would call more integrative medicine, where they try to give you access to, they know providers in the area that, you know, do yoga for people with chronic pain, or Tai Chi, or they know where there's a good aquatic exercise program, and they're really trying to help you navigate through some of the different non-drug therapies. I'm okay if they try a couple nutritional supplements, a couple dietary things, but when I get worried that holistic means I'm going to make a lot of money off you in an entirely different way, is when they're trying to sell you a bunch of nutritional supplements and things like that that are, you know, lining their pocket but not necessarily helping you. So I love that approach. I'm not sure I always love that marketing scheme, because that might mean something different.
Not the message, but not the message.
Exactly, exactly.
Thank you.
Yes.
I don't understand about the fibro fog,
Okay.
and also how fibromyalgia affects the short-term memory.
Okay, so the question was about fibro fog and short-term memory. It is a cardinal symptom of fibromyalgia. Patients taught us that, by the way. We doctors in the medical field heard our patients come up with the term fibro fog, and then we started studying it, and then we could see evidence of it. But I want to give patients the shout out they deserve. That was very much a patient-led discovery. You can see real evidence of it. Let me tell you a couple things about it. It is reversible. When your fibromyalgia gets better, this will get better. There's nothing irreversible about it. It tends to be related to fatigue. You know, your memory will usually be better during times of the day when you have more energy and more, and it tends to get better in concert with other things that will make you better. Sometimes I will recommend people try really weak stimulants. Some of the drugs that can be helpful for fibro fog are drugs like Provigil. Or an over-the-counter drug that is worth trying, but ask your doctor and make sure that it's okay if you try this, is long-acting Sudafed. Have you ever taken Sudafed? You know, the tiny little buzz you get from Sudafed, like you're on coffee? Well, the 12-hour Sudafed is good because it doesn't let you down. If you take 4-hour Sudafed, you go up and then come down. But the 12-hour Sudafed will keep you sort of mildly jazzed for about 12 hours. So if you take it in the morning when you wake up, it'll wear off around when you're trying to go to bed at night. And some people find that weak stimulant is helpful. The more powerful stimulants like amphetamines are usually too powerful for people with fibromyalgia. They will find that they're not helpful. So I would in general recommend, there also is on that website, there's a whole chapter on fibro fog and things you can do to help with memory. The other thing I would say about fibro fog, I had a nurse that worked with me for a long time at Georgetown. She came with us to Michigan, and then she ended up moving back to Washington, D.C. But she would joke about this. She took care of a lot of the fibromyalgia patients with me. Is that once you believe that your fibromyalgia is causing memory problems, then you attribute every memory problem you have to fibromyalgia. And one of the terms that my nurse used to say is, Mrs. Jones, that wasn't fibro fog, that was just a brain fart. We all have brain farts. You know, it's like when someone comes into me and says, you know, I go to the grocery aisle and I can't remember what, I went to the grocery aisle, it's like, I do that too. And I don't have fibro fog. So you also have to be careful about attributing every single memory lapse to your fibromyalgia and sort of fixating on it, because that isn't helpful either. But if you go to that thing in the website, it'll talk about some helpful hints. If you have memory problem, making lists. You saw Sharon, you know, with her list of things. What did you call that?
Oh, my external hard drive.
Your external hard drive. I like that term. No one got the joke except me, I don't think. But yeah, that pad of paper was her external hard drive. But anyway, it is part of the fibromyalgia. It gets better and worse along with the fibromyalgia. You don't have dementia. It's not irreversible, but it's annoying.
I'm going to walk around. If people have
Yeah, you
cards,
pick out the people who, because otherwise I don't want to play favorites.
Oh, no.
I got my neighbors, so I didn't.
Hey, that's good. No, go for it and pick out. I'm just going to see if anybody has
Okay, you're there.
Okay, so I watched, was it me?
Yep,
Yeah,
it's you,
yeah,
Dave.
yeah.
Okay, I watched the Magic Pill, as you just mentioned, but I watched the Netflix documentary interested in the whole food eating aspect of it. So I'm curious about that in your research and bone broth, if you have any insight to.
Okay. I don't know anything about bone broth, so let's start there. Except I love cooking.
Boiling bones.
But
Drinking it.
But diet and nutrition, we're starting to study this, and I hope I can come back in 3 or 4 years and tell you some interesting things about diet and nutrition and pain. There are 2 diets that if you have fibromyalgia you should try because they might help you. The first one that's easy to try is a low glutamate diet. The main things you'll be eliminating from your diet are things that have a lot of MSG in them and artificial sweeteners. A low glutamate diet is not particularly difficult for most people to follow. Try this diet for 7 to 10 days. If you feel better, stay on the diet. The other diet that is harder to try, but I would recommend trying it because there is a lot of evidence that a subset of people will benefit from it, is a gluten-free diet. We don't know why. We don't know exactly how that's happening. It is not easy to follow a gluten-free diet. I'm not going to try it out to be easy, but if you want to try the dietary route, try a gluten-free diet for 7 to 10 days. And again, if you feel better, that tells you that the gluten-free diet is something that you might want to continue to pursue. And you might not have to be entirely gluten-free. You might just want to reduce gluten in your diet, and you might find that you feel better if you reduce gluten in your diet. Those 2 things are known. What is not known is we're doing a lot of work now. The University of Michigan, like a lot of big medical centers, has 2 rapid weight loss programs. One is a bariatric surgery program where people have surgery on their stomach. And the other is a very low-calorie diet. These very low-calorie diets are medically supervised, and people get like about 800 calories of these liquid protein-shaped things a day to eat. Both of these diets cause fairly dramatic improvements in pain and fatigue. And that occurs well before people lose much weight. So in this diet where people are drinking this liquid protein stuff, I think it really is stuff, I don't think it tastes very good at all. Within about 5 to 7 days, they feel a lot better, and they've only lost like 1% of their weight in 5 to 7 days. And there's a lot of animal studies that suggest that intermittent caloric restriction or brief episodes of even starvation might sort of reset things in the brain. So we're studying this a lot right now, and I hope to be able to come back in 3 or 4 years and tell you about dietary suggestions that, other than the low glutamate diet and the gluten-free diet, that might be helpful for chronic pain, because how much more holistic could we be than really telling people the things they could be doing with respect to their diet to improve their pain. No, we haven't. We've looked hard for it too. There's not any single gene that causes someone to develop fibromyalgia. Fibromyalgia is very familial. Like the state senator said in the proclamation, individuals who have fibromyalgia, their family members are 8 times more likely to have fibromyalgia. So the fibromyalgia and irritable bowel and all these conditions run strongly in families, but it's not single genes. It seems like it's a lot of genes together that confer the risk of developing fibromyalgia, not any single gene where we can do a genetic test and say, aha, you have the fibromyalgia gene.
Are fibromyalgia and chronic fatigue the same?
They're brother and sister. They're not the same. There's some, but chronic fatigue syndrome is a label that isn't used nearly as much in the U.S. as it is in other countries. And it really is the same symptoms as fibromyalgia, but those people don't have quite as much musculoskeletal pain. Most of the research has indicated that chronic fatigue syndrome and fibromyalgia are the same. And chronic fatigue syndrome is, in this new NIH term of chronic overlapping pain conditions, chronic fatigue syndrome is one of the conditions like irritable bowel, headache, fibromyalgia, low back pain that is underneath this, and where we really think these are all more the same than they are different diseases.
You want to take a question?
Yeah, and the purple shirt. Yeah.
Question is, I'm a sport person, and you talk about exercising to keep you moving.
Right.
How far do I push my wife to keep moving?
Oh, Oh, it's a really bad idea to push your wife.
If she's moving. But how much?
Let me give you a suggestion. Pull your wife, don't push your wife. No, but in that regard, it really is important that she just, and again, I'm not looking at your wife, I'm looking at the entire room. Just try to become more active. The amount of activity that is required in order to reduce pain is not, I will say again, is not the kind, I play 8 or 10 hours of tennis every week when I'm in town, but there's two different types of people in the world in very overly simplistic terms. There are people that need to be active just to feel okay, and there are people that it doesn't matter how active they are, they feel the same. You already hate me, so I am one of the latter people. The weeks that I'm in town and I'm not traveling and I play 10 hours a week of competitive tennis, I don't feel one bit different than the weeks that I'm traveling internationally and I can't play any tennis. But let me tell you something about yourself. Now I will look at you, and I'm sorry about that. Is that people who develop fibromyalgia were not couch potatoes when they were young. Couch potatoes don't develop fibromyalgia. Everyone that developed fibromyalgia, when you were young, you were active. And the reason you were active when you were young is you knew your body felt better when it was active. You didn't know you had latent fibromyalgia, and when you became inactive, that would cause more pain and your volume control and all the stuff. You just knew that you felt better when you were active. And I have rarely in my entire career, I've seen thousands and thousands and thousands of fibromyalgia patients. All of them earlier in their life, before they developed fibromyalgia, were the ones that everyone else was looking at. You're like the Energizer Bunny. You were the one that's moving around, doing everything, doing things for other people, all this stuff. And then life came crashing down. Different things happened where you developed pain, you became less active, and more pain, less active. But what that should tell you about yourself is that you are not like me. That if you can increase your activity just a little, you might feel a lot better. And the symptom that would get better more rapidly than pain is fatigue. Fatigue is the first symptom to get better if you are really sedentary and you are really inactive and you start just getting up every hour and moving for 5 minutes. The fatigue will be the first thing that gets better. And again, go back to my plane analogy. Anyone, when they get off a long plane flight, is tired. And it's because of the enforced inactivity that occurs in air travel. Yes, and now you get to ask a question now. Because your husband embarrassed you. Yes.
I know. I'm used to it.
He's well-meaning.
I know.
Yeah, he's here with you.
Yes, he is.
Yes.
He's a great support.
Yeah.
One of the problems I'm running into is for the last 2 months I've been doing physical therapy. And after the hour and a half of physical therapy and then going back to work and then coming home, I'm exhausted. I hurt more. I don't think it's helping my body.
I think you're right. You have to find the right type of physical therapist that's used to working with chronic pain patients, used to working with fibro patients. You go to a physical therapist that does mainly sports medicine, and they'll kill you. Because they use the no pain, no gain. That's the sports medicine mantra. You have to start really low, really slow. Everything about fibromyalgia, whether it's new drugs you have to start low, go slow. New activity, start low, go slow. Everything, your body is just more sensitive. You have to, an hour and a half of physical therapy might be something you could eventually build up to being able to tolerate, but that's usually too much. And you just need to tell the therapist, tell them I said so.
Okay.
I don't care. What are they going to do to me?
We have a question in the back corner up there.
Yep.
Young lady up there in the back, very back. Yep, you.
With all the different things that we're supposed to do with fibromyalgia, like going to different doctor after doctor, and yoga, meditation, you're supposed to sleep 8 hours somehow, and then it's like I have a full-time job, there's no time for it.
Right.
When weekends are supposed to be by my rescue group. And it's like the doctors are only open when I'm supposed to be at work. It's like I'm only able to work like 45 hours when I used to be able to work 65.
Yeah, and I'm sorry, because I know that the things that I'm saying are best to do are not easy to do, but let me give you a couple suggestions. one is, don't go to a lot of doctors. Find one doctor that seems to look at the whole person and go to that doctor. But a lot of doctors is usually a waste of time because they're just going to give you conflicting. Okay, right. They're going to give you conflicting advice. They're going to be, you know, competing with each other, and none of them really knows what's going on anyway. So another thing is that as these non-pharmacologic therapies take time, but as they lead to improvements in you, they'll give you back time. Right now, you probably have a lot of time during an average week where you can't do anything. Because you just, you know, you probably are in survival mode where you barely are able to survive, you know, working an 8-hour day, and you come home and you collapse and you're exhausted, but you have stuff to do at home, and then maybe the weekend is when you can try to reboot and refresh. Again, I'm not making any of this out to be simple or easy, but it's what you have to try to do. But you will find that some of these non-drug therapies, a lot of them can be done at home. You don't have to necessarily go somewhere to do them. All the stuff that's in this website, FibroGuide website, is stuff you can do in your home. But try a lot of these things and try to find the simpler, easier things that make you better, rather than all the stuff that makes you get in a car, go somewhere, have someone else do stuff for you or to you. You know, try to look for some of the things you can do on your own, at least after maybe a couple sessions where you learn to do yoga or mindfulness or any number of things that I alluded to. But, you know, having said all of that, I feel bad for the predicament you and many other chronic pain patients are in. And I understand how it's easy for me to stand up here and tell you what would optimally work, and it's not nearly as easy to do it. And I'm sorry for that, but my job is to tell you factually what is most likely to make you better.
Thank you. I have a question, and this might relate to a couple questions we've gotten, but this one is, how does fibromyalgia impact recovery from a